CEOs of Meta, Snap, Twitter, Discord, and TikTok convened on Capitol Hill yesterday. Lawmakers grilled them on child safety on their platforms, at one point encouraging a public apology.
Would you like to apologize for what you've done to these good people?
I'm sorry for everything that you've all been through. No one should have to go through the things that your families have suffered. And this is why we invested so much and are going to continue doing industry-leading efforts to make sure that no one has to go through the types of things that your families have had to suffer.
Joining us right now is one of the whistleblowers who tried to flag child safety issues while working for Mark Zuckerberg, Arturo Béjar. He's a former Facebook engineering director and former consultant to Instagram. Good morning to you. What did you think when Mark Zuckerberg turned around to those families and made that statement to them?
It's the least that he could do. He begins the hearing talking about how there is no proof about the impact that social media has on people, which I can't imagine how disrespectful that was to everybody sitting behind him. All of those parents who have lost children, their loss was preventable, and Mark has the capacity to make that better, and that's what he should be doing.
So, Turo, one of the things we've been batting around this table for a long time, and again this morning, is how, in fact, not necessarily that you would regulate social media, though we could talk about that as well, but to the extent that Mark Zuckerberg and others say, look, we're investing an enormous amount in trying to prevent these things from happening. Are they? Do you believe that they're not, that this is even, that there's no effort being made? It appears that they're spending millions, if not billions of dollars trying to prevent this and are unable. Is it structural to how Facebook is set up? We had talked about, could you put the whole thing on a delay? If you put the whole service on an hour-long delay, could you catch these things in a way you can't if it's all in real time? What would you ultimately suggest?
So they're investing, but they're investing in the wrong thing. They're investing on what they call prevalence, which is a fraction of a % of what people experience. What they could invest in, and what Nick Clegg asked them to invest in the knowledge of issues with addiction, bullying and harassment, and self-harm, are sort of tools that help people with those issues when they face them. So in the case of bullying and harassment, what you have to build is something that makes a teen feel heard when they ask for help. Instead, as part of the data that came out with me, when a teen asks for help, half of them don't feel any support from Instagram whatsoever. And when you can do this through product changes that acknowledge the issue that you're experiencing, it's not about the bully, it's not about taking the content down. I mean, there's for each one of these categories, self-harm, child endangerment, there are things that they could do that they have the infrastructure to do. But if they're only reporting on prevalence, they're not talking about the harm that people experience. I believe if with their quarterly earnings, they would have to report on the number of teens experiencing bullying, unwanted advances, these areas, then they would be doing the work in the correct area, which is reducing harm as experienced by teens.
You're an insider, or a former insider, if you will. You understand, I think, how Mark and others think about these issues. To the extent that you feel like you were not heard, but I think you were heard in that, obviously, he heard your words. Why do you think they're not doing this? Is it a cost issue or something else? Is it a philosophical question?
I think it might be a philosophical question for him because this is not a cost issue. They have the infrastructure, they have the know-how, but they need to be investing it in things that help teens. Like I've asked for a button for the unwanted advances that my daughter received. It's very easy to build. They haven't done it.
But I guess that's what I'm trying to understand. Why do you think they haven't? And do you believe that regulators, you're meeting with lots of them in Washington, plan to actually do something? We've talked about, or I should say policymakers have talked about doing something for a very long time, but for whatever reason have never got there.
Yeah, as to the why, I mean, the best thing I can say about that is what we saw yesterday is Mark being indifferent to the harms that were put in front of him. He's saying we're doing enough, when clearly they're not, and they have the capacity to do so. And I do believe that regulators have the capacity to change this if they were to compel transparency, duty of care. The things that regulators talk about would make a difference, as the companies are not doing this on their own.
And so what does that actually look like, though? And how do you think that Meta compares to the likes of TikTok or the likes of X or the likes of Discord or others?
So in terms of how Meta compares, there was a question of child endangerment on like sexualized content yesterday. The Wall Street Journal published a story about that, and I go in regularly to test. And last week, you go into Reels, and there's an easy way to get back-to-back recommendations of accounts of 7 to 8-year-olds, one of which did a video to a sexual song that had 150,000 views, right? And so Instagram, in particular, has a huge problem with under 10-year-olds being there in a way that incentivizes the most awful things. And that's not something that happens on TikTok. Each of the platforms has things to work on, but I think Meta, because they have the greatest user base and infrastructure, has the greatest responsibility.
What did you make? I'm curious how you think about this. There's issues about self-harm with kids, and then there was issues about speech, free speech, good speech, bad speech. I don't know if you saw the president of TikTok saying that he believed there was no, what he called, pro-Hamas videos or other things running on TikTok. A lot of people put a spotlight on that and said, what are you talking about? And then there became a debate about what it meant to be, quote unquote, pro-Hamas. How do you think about those issues?
So I think people should be able to post anything that the platform allows them to, but that doesn't mean that it should be recommended to kids. And the thing that we don't have today that we should have is real control against what gets recommended to us. Imagine a product that when a kid goes in, it says, you know, this feed is for you, and it's going to be as easy for you to like something as it is to tell us that it's not for you and why. And, you know, all of us should have that. It should be able to say, you know, I don't want to see that. Why? Because to me, it's racist or it's just not the kinds of things I want to see. Without that, we don't have any agency against misinformation. I mean, all these kinds of awful content that is getting put online that they are recommending. And you have to separate out the right to say something from it being recommended to you. And that part is really broken right now.